Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking, well, the ultimate shortcut into the reality of the American space program.
Yeah, and it's a reality that is so much more complex and honestly a lot funnier and darker than the story we usually get.
Absolutely. Forget the pristine white rooms, the soaring orchestral scores. We are ripping down the whole facade of the right stuff to look at the grit, the juvenile humor, the ambition, and, yeah, the toxic management that really defined the space shuttle era.
It's such a critical look behind the curtain. Our source material today is the memoir of astronaut Mike Mullane, and it doesn't just chronicle a career. It really feels like it corrects the historical record.
In what way?
Well, it shows that the journey to space was, undertaken by these deeply flawed, hyper-competitive, and often pretty emotionally immature people.
Right.
And they were operating under this constant known threat of instant annihilation, all while trying to navigate this incredibly dysfunctional organization.
It's just wild. So this deep dive is really for you, and we're going to use Mullane's own experiences from his pipe bomb making childhood, believe it or not, to his selection in that landmark 1978 class, the TFNGs, to chart the course.
We're going to unpack that massive and often hilarious cultural gap between military aviators and civilian scientists.
And we have to dissect that catastrophic management black hole that was engineered by George Abbey and John Young, and then, with the gravity it deserves, confront the terrifying realities that were revealed by the Challenger disaster.
Yeah, our mission here is really to extract and analyze those surprising details. The whole arrested development culture, the kind of psychologically unhinged selection process, the cutthroat competition.
And the immense physical and emotional price they paid just to get that gold astronaut pin.
Exactly. We need to understand not just what they did, but why they operated the way they did and, how that system ultimately enabled a disaster. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, so Mullane's whole foundation was built on adventure. But it was an adventure just saturated with what he calls blarney.
Right.
And this was all thanks to his father, an Irish New Yorker, a WWII vet, who was just a master storyteller.
Yeah.
He was constantly weaving these fictional, vibrant narratives about his service in the Pacific.
And these weren't just, little exaggerations. They were fully realized cinematic stories. They were designed to entertain and maybe even to shield his kids from some of the harsher truths of life.
The most famous one had to be Washing Machine Charlie.
Yes, the mythical Japanese pilot who supposedly flew this old biplane over the American base at night.
But instead of bombs, he'd drop empty pop bottles.
Exactly. And the air rushing over the openings would mimic the whistle of incoming bombs, and everyone, including Mullane's father, would just dive headfirst for cover.
It sounds so absurd, but it served a purpose, didn't it? It trained young Mullane to expect drama and excitement, even if it was totally made up.
And the heroic tales only made that stronger. I mean, he grew up hearing about his dad being shot down, parachuting into the jungle, joining up with native freedom fighters.
And battling his way through enemy lines before being rescued by a submarine. It's straight out of a movie.
It is. He later realized, of course, that none of it had actually happened. But the seed was planted, this belief that life was meant to be this grand, unpredictable adventure.
And that was fueled by constantly being on the move.
Mm-hmm.
His family was always on the road like a Bedouin tribe, moving every couple of years for his father's transfers. Kansas, Georgia, Florida, Texas.
Mississippi, Hawaii, it was constant.
That sounds exhausting, but Mullane talks about it with so much enthusiasm. He says every new state line, every transfer meant driving toward a horizon that was so clean and crystalline it looked like it was painted with a single-haired brush.
That anticipation of the unknown, that became his comfort zone. But underneath all this mobility and the heroic stories was a really serious personal trauma.
His father had contracted polio.
Yeah, a devastating illness that was just slowly taking his mobility. And Mullane remembers these deeply private moments that just exposed his father's suffering. Moments that were in such sharp contrast to that big, adventurous persona.
Like the time his dad had his car modified with hand controls. He drove the boys way out into the Texas prairie, parked the car, and just started drinking bourbon.
He wasn't driving for adventure that day. He drove out there to cry in private while he recounted his old war stories. He was basically mourning the mobility he'd lost.
In young Mullane, he couldn't grasp the finality of it all, so he offers this solution that is just It's heartbreaking in its innocence.
He'd seen an amputee veteran with these amazing artificial legs, what he called pretend legs.
Okay.
So he rushes back to the car, just beaming, and suggests his dad just ask the doctor to cut off his real legs so he could walk again with the new ones. It just captures the chaos and the misunderstanding of their whole family life.
That same kind of chaotic resourcefulness pops up again during this harrowing trip in June of 1963. They're driving through the New Mexico desert in their '56 Pontiac, and the radiator just starts hemorrhaging water.
And they are stranded.
Yeah.
Middle of nowhere. This is where you see the future astronaut's engineering mind meet the sheer panic of being in the desert.
His father, the self-appointed expert, tells the boys to scavenge the car for any fluid they can find.
Any fluid whatsoever. So they're emptying cans of Coke, beer, a jug of cherry cider into the radiator.
They even squeeze oranges into the mix.
I mean, it's a true necessity is the mother of idiocy moment, but it says so much about their survival instincts.
And that desperation leads directly to one of the most incredible accidental engineering moments in history. They stop at an Indian trading post because the car is surging, and his dad starts working on the fuel pump right there under the hood.
Right, and as he's fiddling with it, gasoline just starts spraying all over the hot engine block. The air around them fills with this dense, highly volatile fuel vapor.
And Mullane, who's always the observer, notices a blue spark coming from a disconnected distributor wire just go tick, tick, tick against the engine block.
And then
Kara-boom.
a massive explosion.
A blinding flash, intense heat. The fuel vapor had mixed perfectly with the air, and that tiny spark created what was basically a prototype fuel-air explosive device. Right there.
Under the hood of a 1956 Pontiac. He later realized the Air Force would spend millions developing a similar weapon decades later.
But his dad perfected it through, sheer desperation and electrical negligence.
The aftermath is just cinematic. The brothers are stumbling back, smelling of burned hair, and their father, who can't move quickly because of his braces, he just falls backward, his face blackened like a cartoon character.
And the Indians who had been sitting silently on the porch, just watching this whole chaotic scene.
It just erupted in laughter. Not just polite chuckles, but falling off their chairs, can't breathe laughter. And Mullane realizes that this upbringing, where tragedy often turned into accidental comedy and minor explosions were just routine, it was perfect preparation for the high-risk world of spaceflight.
That high-risk tolerance got focused into a specific dream in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik.
Right.
He remembers standing out in the cold twilight, seeing that moving dot of light, and feeling this profound sense of awe, but also anger at the U.S. administration for being caught so flat-footed.
He was just mesmerized by the speed, 17,000 miles per hour. And that passive observation, it quickly turned into very active participation.
Within weeks, he was running his own private space program in the New Mexico desert. And again, these were not, safe, store-bought model rockets.
No, not at all. He describes building these 5-foot multi-stage devices out of steel tubing packed with what he called wicked home-brewed propellants.
We talk about pipe bombs.
Essentially, yes, pipe bombs. He credits pure dumb luck for surviving this phase, especially one launch where the rocket just arced straight back toward them.
His father, scrambling for cover, was this cacophony of clanking crutches and metal braces, sounding like a machine gone wild. Mullane dove under the car, just waiting for the impact.
That kind of early life just normalized extreme risk. It was a prerequisite for flying the shuttle.
And despite this completely chaotic background, Mullane somehow compiles the perfect resume for NASA. He's a West Pointer, a decorated Vietnam combat vet with 134 missions.
Nearly 1,500 flying hours, an MS in aeronautical engineering, a flight test engineer graduate. By any standard, he was the guy.
But he knew the odds were still astronomical. And even after passing all the physical criteria, he had to face the psychological gauntlet.
A process that seemed designed not just to assess your stability, but to actually induce paranoia.
He talks about Psych 1, the first interview. The whole experience was defined by this intense self-monitoring. He's watching for eye twitches, checking for a pulsating neck vein.
Convinced his dream is going to die if he fails to project this image of absolute, unwavering mental stability.
And his biggest fear was something as simple as counting backward by sevens.
It's absurd, right? Here's a guy who flew combat missions in Vietnam, and he's paralyzed by the fear that struggling with basic subtraction will flag him as unstable. The process just weaponized self-doubt.
Then came Psych 2, Dr. Terry McGuire, who he said was the ultimate smooth talker, the good cop.
Or, as Mullane perfectly put it, a used car dealer with this big, expansive smile. McGuire wasn't after his money, but his essence.
Mullane felt like McGuire was trying to peel back all his layers of defense, making him feel like Captain Kirk facing down a Klingon battlecruiser.
The whole psychological selection process basically demanded that you had to be able to project perfect calm and confidence while internally managing this paralyzing paranoia. It was a test of competitive psychological performance, not just stability.
So the moment that 1978 class, the 35 new guys, or TFNGs, came together, the paranoia of selection was, well, it was instantly replaced by a massive culture clash.
Oh, yeah. This was the first class that really mixed career military aviators with career civilian scientists. And the demographics were just wildly different.
The gap was huge. On one side, you have the combat vets, guys who had faced death daily, who had flown rocket attacks in Southeast Asia.
Who had seen engineering systems fail firsthand and who lived by this rigorous, if often crass, military hierarchy.
And on the other side, you have the postdocs.
Right. Mullane calls them perpetual students, PhD after PhD, their lives revolving around stargazing or microscopic research. Their greatest operational fear until joining NASA was probably getting an A-.
Or rejection from a peer-reviewed journal. The gap between those two realities was just immense.
And that gap created the environment Mullane calls planet-arrested development, or Planet AD. And this culture was heavily defined by the all-male institutions the military flyers came from.
Catholic school dogma and West Point tradition.
Exactly. He details how this dogma shaped their views, especially this profound, ingrained sexism. They were taught that the shortcut to hell was through a woman's crotch, and that women only went to college to find a husband.
They were taking up valuable seats that men needed for real jobs.
And when this Planet AD mindset collided with the hyper-professional, brilliant, pioneering women of the TFNG class, Judy Resnick, Sally Ride, Rhea Seddon, the results were immediate and deeply juvenile.
Mullane himself was a prime example. On his very first day, he tells a joke with the word tits in it, trying to be one of the boys.
And the result was not laughter. It was complete social isolation from Sally Ride, who avoided him for the next 10 years. He just admits he didn't have the professional vocabulary to interact with women in that environment.
And that immaturity wasn't just crass jokes. It sometimes got into outright juvenile bullying, often disguised as a prank.
Like the incident with the live grass snake. A group of men found it near the gym, went into the women's locker room, and shoved it into Judy Resnick's purse.
And then they just stood outside the door, giggling like middle schoolers, until her scream echoed through the building.
I mean, this wasn't professional camaraderie. It was an active expression of discomfort with professional female colleagues who were seen as invaders.
One Navy TFNG even summarized it perfectly. He saw Sally Ride's bumper sticker that said, "A woman's place is in the cockpit." And he just chuckled and muttered, "A woman is a Kioseek pit."
Oh.
This cultural tension was constantly tested. The flaming hooker test, started by Hoot Gibson at a bar, is a classic example of the military guys trying to test the academics.
Right. The test involved drinking high-proof alcohol that was served on fire.
The civilian postdocs, with no experience, they try to sip the burning alcohol, and they end up with singed facial hair and cries of pain.
Meanwhile, Hoot is a picture of composure, just downing them uninjured.
He finally reveals the aviator secret. You have to be fearless. You toss the entire glass back all at once. The logic was that there wasn't enough oxygen in your mouth to feed the flame.
It was this bizarre, dangerous lesson in bravado that was totally meaningless for spaceflight, but absolutely vital for cultural acceptance into the aviator club.
And the military guys loved exploiting the civilians' naivete, like with the candy bomber BS.
Oh, this story is just outrageous. Mullane and his colleagues invented it for a civilian scientist named Jeff, who seemed to believe anything the combat vets told him.
The story was so detailed, Mullane claimed he flew a candy bomber over Vietnamese villages to lure women and children out of their spider holes.
And then, 30 seconds later, a napalm plane, flown by other astronaut colleagues, would follow and lay down the fire.
It was this deeply dark, completely fabricated story just to test the limits of his credulity.
And the scientist believed it. He was horrified, only realizing a minute later he'd been had. Mullane notes this scientist remained an unpolluted scientist, while a lot of other civilians desperately tried to adopt that military mystique.
This friction even bled into religion. Mullane got himself excommunicated from the astronaut Bible study group.
Right. They were having a serious discussion about the afterlife, debating if someone who had never heard of Jesus could still get into God's kingdom.
And Mullane, he just couldn't resist the setup. He jumps in with, "Yeah, Shannon, what about women?" referring to astronaut Shannon Lucid.
The silence was apparently deafening. Shannon Lucid, who was admired for being above all the office politics, just gave him this look that promised eternal retribution.
And he and his wife were summarily cut from the group. He jokes that when he dies, he's afraid he's going to two hells, Bible hell and feminist hell, where Shannon, Sally, and Judy will preside over his torment.
And yet, despite this juvenile atmosphere, these women were absolute pioneers. They weren't just token selections. They were top-tier professionals who were intensely competing for that one coveted title, First American Woman in Space.
You just have to look at their profiles.
Yeah.
Judy Resnick, an electrical engineering PhD, classical pianist, she flew on Mullane's first mission and tragically died on Challenger.
Rhea Seddon, a surgeon, beautiful and confident, she married Hoot Gibson, the ultimate aviator stereotype.
And Sally Ride, the physicist and superb tennis player who went on to be the first. And then you had Shannon Lucid.
Right, who Mullane really admired because she was completely indifferent to all the office politics, the celebrity obsession, the male bravado. That focus let her bypass the noise and just do the job.
And she ended up flying 5 times, including that landmark 6-month stay on the Russian Mir space station.
So when Mullane finally arrived at the Johnson Space Center in '78, the environment itself was a bit of an anticlimax.
Instead of these gleaming monuments to science, JSC just looked like a low-bid university campus.
The only thing that really suggested epic space history was a Saturn V rocket lying on its side. Inside the astronaut offices in Building 4, the conditions were, well, they were Dilbert-esque.
Movable steel panels for office walls, creating this cheap temporary feel that just didn't match the seriousness of the work.
And in that mundane setting, the intense hierarchy of the astronaut corps became immediately apparent.
The first test of that came during the Monday morning meeting, chaired by the chief of astronauts, John Young. Mullane and most of the rookies, the Askins, they naturally drift to the back.
Right. Avoiding confrontation, avoiding attention, but their class leader, Navy pilot Rick Hawk, immediately marches to the front and takes a seat at the big conference table.
And this wasn't just any table. It was nicknamed the Sacred Table of Apollo, reserved for those who had flown to the moon or commanded early shuttle missions.
Mullane instantly saw Hawk's move for what it was, a calculated, aggressive assertion of alpha dominance. He was marking his territory in a world where seniority and flight time were everything.
That's the core of the culture right there. The coin of the realm was spaceflight and only spaceflight.
All your previous accomplishments, West Point rank, combat hours, multiple PhDs, they were instantly meaningless once you stepped inside JSC.
Those who had flown were rich beyond measure. Unassigned veterans and rookies were the proletariat. Until those hold-down bolts blew, you were nobody.
And this intense internal competition, it manifested in the most absurd ways, like when they were asked for a signature sample for the AutoPen machine.
Which was just a machine to automatically sign thousands of fan photos.
But this simple administrative request became this intense personal challenge. Mullane wasted countless pages trying different scripts, faster, slower, adjusting the slant.
Obsessing over producing the perfect autograph, one that would look famous, dazzling, important. It's a bizarre little microcosm of the astronaut personality, competitive to the point of absurdity.
But NASA also made sure the rookies got a serious reality check very early on. During a tour of mission control, the guide played a piece of audio that just ripped all the glamour away instantly.
They played the raw audio tape from the Apollo 1 fire on January 27, 1967.
And the astronauts just listened in profound silence as Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee went from calm, technical talk to these urgent, terrified cries. "There's a fire, get us out of here."
And then the sound of screams and static as the communication system burned.
The silence afterward, punctuated by the echo of "we're burning up," was a deliberate, necessary moment of reckoning. Mullane realized that terror, that reality of instant death, should have been played for every candidate during the interviews.
It was the ultimate informed consent.
And beyond simulations and warnings, a lot of the military astronauts' exposure to routine high risk came from the T-38 supersonic jets they flew almost daily.
The irony is that the flight operations at NASA were so different from the rigid military environments they had just left. At NASA, there was this dangerous, almost non-existent layer of rules.
Hoot Gibson even joked, there are no rules. They were professional pilots, but they were essentially teenagers who were handed the keys to the fastest car on the block.
And this freedom encouraged just rampant, unnecessary risk-taking. They would flat-hat fly dangerously low across the Gulf of Mexico, weaving through these massive thunderstorms like slalom skiers.
Mullane describes the feeling of speed and power as an orgasm outside of sex. The unbound freedom of the sky mixed with pure adrenaline.
And the danger escalated even further when they played these high-G games of chicken, turning their jets toward one another, slamming the throttles into afterburner, and passing canopy to canopy just a couple hundred feet apart.
And then, after that near collision, they'd jerk the jets into these vertical, spiraling climbs, straining against G-forces that peaked at 7.
And crucially, they didn't wear anti-G suits like typical fighter pilots. They were risking G-induced unconsciousness, or GLOC.
Which would mean immediate fatal impact with the water. Their only defense was this extreme guttural straining to keep blood in their brains.
It seems baffling that NASA, which was supposedly defined by its safety protocols after Apollo 1, would let its elite corps do this.
Yeah, why was there such a clear lack of professional oversight on the T-38 program?
It seems to stem from a cultural deference to the flyer persona, and maybe from John Young's profound discomfort with command.
Right. Mullane, a mission specialist, not a pilot, he even got a chance to land a T-38 at one point, a clear violation of protocol.
This led to a severe reaming from John Young, the chief of astronauts.
Young was furious, calling it the dumbest thing I've heard in a long time, arguing that non-pilot stunts jeopardized the entire T-38 fleet.
But the most telling detail was Young's demeanor during the confrontation.
He couldn't look him in the eye. He stared at his shoes, at papers, out the window. Unlike every commander Mullane had ever had, Young was profoundly uncomfortable asserting his authority.
That discomfort, that reluctance to command decisively, it set a dangerous precedent for the whole office. If the chief of astronauts was hesitant, it left a vacuum.
And while the T-38s were fun, the actual shuttle training was often just sheer physical misery, starting with the zero-G plane, the Vomit Comet.
It was a modified Boeing 707 flying these huge roller coaster trajectories, which gave you 30 seconds of weightlessness at the top, immediately followed by a bone-crushing 2G smash on the way down.
Mullane calls it literally a barf factory.
The PR videos only show the first few dives, when everyone is still laughing. But by the 10th parabola, the smell of stomach fluid had permeated the whole plane.
It was a foul odor that inevitably started this chain reaction of vomiting among the already nauseous crew.
And then there was the weightless environment training facility, the WAETF, where they practiced spacewalks underwater.
The physical demands here were immense. You're practicing in a suit that's pressurized like iron. Just opening and closing your hand against that pressure caused rapid, debilitating fatigue.
And when you were inverted in the water, your full body weight would bear down on the rigid neck ring of the suit, which he described as torture.
It just speaks to the brutal physical conditioning that was required to do even simple tasks in space.
And this training environment also exposed the bizarre, almost embarrassing engineering challenges that came up when you're preparing a mixed-gender crew.
Namely, how do you collect urine from women during a long spacewalk? Diapers were messy and internal catheters were dangerous.
So the engineering team came up with this truly bizarre solution proposed by a gynecologist, a custom mold of the inside of a woman's vagina.
That would be used as an alignment tool for an exterior-mounted urine collector.
A volunteer named Candy tested this, with limited success. The solution was eventually abandoned for a modernized diaper. But the anecdote is solidified by Mullane's revelation that Candy kept the vaginal mold on her coffee table at home.
It's a hilarious, slightly gross reminder that even the most advanced space exploration requires intense, creative problem-solving for just basic anatomical functions.
Which brings us to the most critical section of the memoir. The organizational environment, the management structure that Mullane calls a black hole.
Yeah, while the astronauts were grappling with culture and training, this toxic duopoly was governing the future of the entire Corps.
This was the relationship between George Abbey, the director of flight crew operations, and John Young, the chief of astronauts.
Abbey, whom many saw as the real king and a rapacious powermonger, maintained absolute, suffocating secrecy around the single most important thing in an astronaut's life: flight assignments.
And Young, as we noted, was uncomfortable with command. He left a vacuum.
Abbey filled that vacuum completely, seizing authority for crew selection, often overriding Young and even Chris Kraft's objections. And this deliberate secrecy created a poisonous situation fueled by rumor and fear.
And the mechanism of this fear was just the complete lack of transparency. Astronauts lived in terror of crossing Abbey. Job decisions weren't based on policy or performance. They were dictated by rumor and perceived favor.
If Abbey frowned on a project, that project was instantly career poison.
Mullane gives a specific example. He and Shannon Lucid were told to prepare a report justifying the need for mission specialists to get pilot training, a sensible recommendation.
But then they heard a rumor that Abby was vehemently opposed to the idea.
So they dropped the work immediately, treating the report like radioactive waste. They abandoned a good idea simply because of an unconfirmed rumor about their boss's preferences.
It shows how the system just paralyzed initiative and substituted personal preference for sound engineering.
This environment of fear meant Mullane was relegated to Space Lab support for his first assignments, which he knew put him at the rock bottom of TFNG preferences.
And the ultimate consequence of this management black hole and the overriding emphasis on schedule pressure, the 800-pound gorilla of the shuttle program, was the O-ring cover-up that led directly to the Challenger disaster.
NASA had promised Congress a rapid flight rate, and nothing was allowed to jeopardize that schedule.
The first real warning came 5 months after STS-2. During the post-flight inspection, they found heat damage on one of the solid rocket booster O-rings.
And why was that so alarming, even if the O-ring hadn't technically failed?
It was alarming because those O-rings, which sealed the joints of the boosters, should never show any signs of heat damage. Any evidence of heat meant that hot, corrosive exhaust gas had bypassed the primary O-ring,
Which was a catastrophic design flaw known as blow-by. It indicated a serious problem that threatened the entire stack.
But because the schedule was the primary driver, instead of halting flights and redesigning the joint, they began this dangerous process of just normalizing the anomaly.
They accepted a failure mode as an operating parameter.
The moment of truth came when Thiokol engineers, desperate to endorse their own product and under extreme NASA pressure, conducted a deliberately flawed test.
They intentionally damaged an O-ring more severely than the STS-2 damage, pressurized it to 3 times the necessary level, and declared it flight-worthy.
Mullane notes the tragic irony. They accepted something that was never expected and not completely understood. This compromise wasn't just an engineering mistake. It was a moral one, driven by management overriding the desperate objections of engineers like Roger Boisjoly.
It was a conscious decision to value operational momentum over safety. They essentially signed off on the known risk of O-ring failure, gambling that the secondary seal would always hold.
And in the freezing conditions of January 28, 1986, that gamble spectacularly failed.
Mullane was at Los Alamos National Laboratory when Challenger launched. He watched the replay on the news in stunned silence, a moment that just instantly froze time for everyone in the program.
The immediate reaction in the room was disbelief. Mullane had to deliver the grim truth to the lab personnel. There's no ejection system on the Space Shuttle. They're lost.
The initial consensus among the astronaut corps, a necessary security blanket, was that the crew was killed instantly during the breakup.
But that belief was just tragically dismantled months later when astronaut doctors Jim Bagian and Sonny Carter presented the autopsy revelations.
And these findings proved definitively that the crew survived the initial breakup and were conscious for a significant period.
The evidence was harrowing and incontrovertible. First, they found Mike Smith's personal emergency air pack, his PEEP, was in the on position.
This was a small oxygen pack for emergencies. But crucially, the switch for that PEEP was not accessible to the pilot, Smith. It could only be manually flipped by mission specialist 1 or 2.
Onizuka or Resnick.
Which proved that at least one person, and likely both of them, was conscious after the external tank exploded, scrambling to provide oxygen to their pilot because the cabin had lost air. They were fighting for their lives.
The second piece of evidence compounded the horror. Electrical system switches on Mike Smith's panel had been moved out of their locked nominal positions.
Rigorous testing confirmed that the violent G-forces of the fragmentation could not have moved those switches.
Which meant Smith, the pilot, was conscious, recognized the loss of power, and was desperately trying to restore electrical power to the crippled spacecraft as it fell.
And the final piece of evidence ruled out that last small comfort they had. That explosive depressurization had immediately rendered them unconscious.
Analyzing the wreckage, they found no buckling of the cockpit floor. If there had been an explosive breach, the pressure differential would have buckled the floor upward. The lack of buckling suggested the cockpit remained largely intact.
So we have a conscious crew, 2 mission specialists trying to deploy emergency oxygen, the pilot trying to restore power, all sealed inside an intact cockpit. What happened next is it's almost unimaginable.
It meant the crew was subjected to a conscious 2.5-minute free fall, plummeting through the atmosphere at terminal velocity nearly 250 miles per hour before impacting the Atlantic Ocean.
The PIAC was even found to be depleted by 2.5 minutes, further corroborating the duration of consciousness.
Mullane's reflection on this is one of profound collective guilt. While they were angry at management, they all shared the blame. Every astronaut had prioritized their ambition for flight over safety.
They accepted flying without an escape system, they accepted the pressure, and they accepted carrying unnecessary passengers and politicians on those rockets.
The system had created an environment where the ambition for the gold pin just outweighed the moral responsibility for safety. The price paid was not just death, but the horrifying realization that their friends died fully conscious and aware of their fate.
The psychological terror of riding that rocket stack, it impacted the families profoundly, even before launch. Mullane describes the immense stress placed on his wife, Donna.
Yeah, Donna called the required pre-launch selection of family escorts pre-selecting an escort into widowhood. That preparation was a constant, stark reminder of the edge her husband's career put her on.
That stress peaked just 10 days before Mullane's first launch. His son, Pat, got strep throat, and the flight surgeon wanted Mullane to come in for a swab.
Mullane's reaction was explosive. He just raged at his wife, ignoring his son's illness, because he was consumed by this paralyzing fear that he could be grounded like Ken Mattingly on Apollo 13.
He ordered Donna to stop going to the surgeon until after he launched.
And that emotional failure, prioritizing his career over his family's needs, is something he says he'll carry with him forever. It just speaks to that intense tunnel vision focus required to be an astronaut.
And the physical challenges started right on the launch pad. Mullane describes climbing into the cockpit and finding it was as cold as a meat locker. The freezing temperatures caused a critical part of his anatomy to contract, threatening the integrity of his urine collection device condom.
He was in physical agony, convinced his bladder would rupture, leading to this ultimate humiliation, urinating in his flight suit, shorting out circuits, and becoming launch pad gossip for decades.
And trying to relieve himself while lying on his back proved impossible.
It was only by loosening his harness and struggling to roll slightly onto his side that he finally managed to open the floodgates. It's a striking detail. A combat vet, a highly qualified engineer, reduced to paralyzing panic over the failure of a glorified condom.
Once in orbit, the physical realities changed again, producing some very strange anatomical phenomena because of the lack of gravity.
Yeah, because gravity no longer pooled blood in your lower limbs, the fluid shifted upward, causing what they all called the Viagra effect. Painful, intense morning erections strong enough to drill through kryptonite, as he puts it.
And conversely, the same fluid shift gave the women rejuvenating effects, skinnier calves and thighs, and for some, larger non-sag breasts. Spaceflight literally offered a temporary cosmetic enhancement.
And then there was the infamous space toilet, an engineering marvel that required absolute discipline.
Mullane followed Bob Crippen's essential advice: strip naked, because it's infinitely easier to wipe feces off your skin than off your clothes in zero-G.
Even with practice, a direct hit was tough because, as one astronaut perfectly lamented, turds come out curved in zero-G, and if you needed toilet tissue, you couldn't lift your rear off the seat.
You risked everything floating away. The whole process was meticulously engineered to prevent fecal smears and maintain air filtration.
And though Mullane was lucky enough to be immune, about 50% of astronauts suffered from space adaptation syndrome space sickness.
And the attempts to inoculate against it, from stomach-churning T-38 acrobatics to sleeping head down with bricks under the bed, they were all universally ineffective.
But the greatest on-orbit hazard wasn't sickness or curved turds. It was their own waste becoming a weapon. On STS-41D, a frozen ball of wastewater, a urine-sickle, formed on the side of Discovery.
The concern for mission control was immediate and severe. During re-entry, that massive block of ice could break off and damage the shuttle's fragile heat tiles.
A damaged tile meant a fatal breach in the thermal protection system, potentially causing the tail to just burn off.
Mullane realized the absurdity of it. I had never imagined a threat from a frozen block of urine. I had an image of Peter Jennings reporting the astronauts were killed by their own urine. It wasn't a heroic-sounding epitaph.
Commander Hank Hartsfield had to use the robot arm to tap the ice away. And this incident forced the crew to abandon the primary urine collection system and resort to using Apollo bags for the rest of the mission.
For the men, this was a messy failure due to the physics of zero-G.
It's just basic physics. With no gravity, the urine would gather, form spheres, and then inevitably splash back at them.
So they had to innovate quickly, stuffing washcloths and later socks into the bags to wick the fluid away and break that surface tension.
Judy Resnick faced a particularly difficult choice here. Using the bag was a messy price for her feminist stand. If she used the male urinal, she knew it would be a shout from the rooftops that a penis was necessary to deal with certain shuttle emergencies.
She used the bag, regardless of the mess, to prove it wasn't a gender-specific emergency solution.
And even in orbit, that competitive nature didn't fade. During a call from President Reagan, a minor systems alert sounded. While the crew pantomimed working the malfunction, Mike Coates used his airtime to deliver a highly competitive pro-Navy observation about seeing so much water.
And Commander Hank Hartsfield, an Air Force pilot, immediately shot back, defending his branch by noting that all of the Earth is covered by air, Mr. President.
Even while talking to the leader of the free world, they couldn't stop competing over which branch was superior.
That role as national heroes meant frequent public speaking. Mullane admitted he feared public speaking more than death. He faced his Toastmaster terror during one event when he was asked to lead the audience in singing America the Beautiful.
His brain just log-jammed. He mixed every patriotic lyric he knew into an incoherent mess, singing only the words he was sure of, "Oh, beautiful." While lowering the mic, certain the sign language interpreter knew he was a complete fraud.
And the Planet AD humor continued. Mullane recalls a formal dinner where a Marine fighter pilot offered a toast that just defined the culture. Here's to gunpowder and here's to pussy. One I kill with, the other I'll die for, but I love the smell of both.
This cultural gap led to direct confrontations. After one speech where Mullane carelessly referred to the female astronauts as girls, a sharp wife from the audience just ripped him apart publicly.
Demanding to know if anyone called him a boy astronaut, pointing out that Dr. Seddon was a board-certified surgeon with better credentials than anyone on the stage.
He was constantly being confronted by the fact that the external world had moved far beyond the locker room culture he was raised in.
And finally, there were the celebrity encounters. He and his cohort met Christy Brinkley, who is described as a 10, making a Stepford wife look like a hag.
He and Steve Hawley were instantly reduced to stuttering fools, but later, when asked which celebrity he preferred, Mullane chose Annette Funicello, the former Mouseketeer.
This choice completely bewildered his wife, Donna. She pointed out Brinkley was decades younger and more beautiful. But for Mullane, Funicello represented a lifelong teenage fantasy.
Donna's recurring joke just summarized the entire TFNG ethos. Will you ever grow up?
Mullane flew 3 shuttle missions in total. But the decision to retire, though he wanted to return to the Rocky Mountain West, was ultimately driven by the profound psychological toll his career took on his wife.
He describes a launch attempt that was scrubbed. He called his wife Donna, expecting her to be relieved, but instead he found her sobbing hysterically.
Mike, can't do it. I just can't do it again.
That moment was the catalyst. He was facing the swiftness of life, realizing he had missed irretrievable time with his maturing children. The speed at which his kids had grown was his wake-up call.
He left NASA, despite his immense fear of becoming a civilian outsider, because he had to stop making his wife walk that razor-thin line between glory and death.
And his final legacy reflects a profound and important change in perspective. He entered NASA cocky, secure in his military superiority over the postdoc civilians.
He felt their degrees in theory paled in comparison to his combat experience.
But watching Pinky Nelson, a civilian mission specialist, steer his jetpack across the black abyss to fix a satellite, or hearing Steve Hawley joke during the terrifying first moments of an abort, "I thought we'd be higher when the engines quit," it humbled him.
He realized the civilian scientists had skill, courage, and composure in spades.
The physical time capsule of the TFNG history remains at the Outpost Tavern, the astronaut after-work hangout, a place that now boasts modernized bathrooms, a huge improvement from the one-hole closets Donna refused to use.
Mullane still visits, sitting at the bar to listen to the TFNG ghosts whisper stories of shared joy, tragedy, and heartbreak. Their history was written there.
It's a powerful image that brings us back to the central conflict of the astronaut experience. When you visit the Astronaut Memorial at KSC, where the names of the fallen are etched in granite rotating to catch the sun, you see the ultimate price.
And Mullane's account forces us to hold 2 opposing ideas in our minds at once: the extraordinary bravery of the individuals and the profound failures of the system that killed them.
So given Mullane's raw account of the fear, the toxic management under Abby, the normalization of failures, and the juvenile culture, the question we have to leave you with isn't about the courage to reach space. It's about the ethical cost of maintaining the dream.
When does the intense ambition required to achieve something magnificent blind you to the moral compromises required to keep it alive? Is the gold astronaut pin truly worth the risk of being killed by your own frozen urine? Or worse, knowing you consciously enabled a management system that ultimately silenced your friends.
That is the deep dive into the cost of the cosmos.